Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something that's, well, on a lot of minds right now: weight loss, particularly using medications like semaglutide.
Mm,
But we're not just talking about the drug itself, we're exploring a really distinctive perspective, one developed by Dan Hollis.
that's right. We've pulled key excerpts from his FAQs and also his human-centered framework for semaglutide and weight loss.
Right.
And our mission here really is to understand this specific approach, how it shifts the focus beyond just the prescription and sort of zeroes in on the human element of the whole journey.
And the core idea is immediately fascinating, isn't it? It completely reframes what semaglutide is in this context.
Yeah.
It's not presented as the solution, really.
Absolutely not. That's the central thesis right there. Semaglutide is framed much more as a signal or maybe a pause button, yeah, or a reset.
Hey.
It provides this incredibly valuable opportunity, this moment of quiet where, as the sources put it, the noise gets quiet. It's a chance to build something entirely new.
But, and this feels like the critical part, only if you know what to do with that silence.
Precisely. Yes. And that's where this framework really tries to distinguish itself. A lot of programs might, I think the sources use this phrase, hand you a syringe and wish you luck.
Right, sort of. Here you go, good luck. Whereas this approach says, here's not just the tool, but actually, here's a map.
A map,
Okay.
exactly, and structure and really essential support. It's built on this understanding that the journey isn't just about your biology. It's more complex.
Which is why it's called human-centered.
Right. It's about the conversation happening between your biology, sure, but also your behavior and your deeper emotional blueprint, that kind of thing.
So it's maybe less about micromanaging every single dose or, agonizing over every macronutrient.
Well, those practical steps are part of it, of course, but the fundamental focus is different. It's really about using semaglutide as a kind of window,
Yeah.
window for change.
A catalyst.
Yes, a catalyst, not the ultimate destination or the sole driver of whether you succeed or not.
Okay, this next point is where things get really interesting, I think. It diverges quite a bit from a purely clinical view. There's this huge emphasis on the emotional landscape. Why is rebuilding that emotional framework so crucial here?
Yeah, what's particularly insightful in this material is the idea that people often don't regain weight because the drug stops working. That's not usually it.
No, interesting. So what is it then?
They relapse because they haven't reconstructed the emotional support system that food used to provide for them.
So it's about addressing the kind of the void left when that constant noise of cravings just
Yep.
disappears.
Exactly. And the sources stress it's vital to acknowledge that feeling anxious or just plain weird when those intense cravings stop. Well, that's completely normal.
Right.
For so many people, food wasn't just fuel. It was comfort. It was a sense of control. Sometimes it was even, part of their identity.
It's like that automatic go-to coping mechanism suddenly just goes offline.
Right, exactly.
Well,
And when that part of your life suddenly goes quiet, the sources describe it almost like losing a friend.
what?
And this framework emphasizes that you need to actively work through those feelings, acknowledge them,
Yeah.
rather than trying to just ignore them or power through.
Which brings us to this concept of identity work. That's a phrase that comes up repeatedly in these sources.
hmm And this raises a really critical question for long-term success. How do you not just lose the weight, but actually keep it off?
Yeah.
And the answer offered here isn't simply more dieting or more discipline. It's fundamentally about becoming the kind of person, the kind of person who doesn't need weight loss as a perpetual project anymore.
Okay.
And that requires dedicated identity work.
So success isn't just hitting a number on the scale, it's defined differently.
Far from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this framework, success is measured more by how many old, unhelpful coping mechanisms have been successfully replaced with genuinely functional tools. The weight loss itself becomes almost a side effect of gaining clarity and building a new self.
And regaining weight, which is, let's face it, a painful reality for many people. How is that understood from this perspective?
It's not primarily viewed as a failure of willpower or even solely as biology taking over again. It's framed more as the consequence of unaddressed patterns.
Okay.
And crucially, not building that new identity we just talked about. The sources state you maintain weight loss, not through sheer discipline, but through alignment.
Alignment.
Aligning your biology, your behavior, and your emotional world. Getting them all working together, essentially.
There's a really personal connection for the developer here, too, isn't there? It feels like it comes from experience.
Yes, absolutely. Dan Hollis shares that his deep motivation comes from, living through it himself. He experienced the struggle, the feeling of being broken and ashamed.
Right.
And he built this framework specifically to provide a different path so others wouldn't have to navigate that really difficult journey feeling entirely alone.
Okay, let's dive into the framework itself then. The sources lay out what's called the human-centered framework as this 7-point guide, and it's emphasized pretty heavily that this isn't just a checklist, but a fundamental shift.
That distinction is key, yeah. It's not about just following rote instructions. It's about changing your whole approach at at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
Point one is start with silence.
When the cravings stop, the truth begins. That line really sticks with you, doesn't it?
It really captures the essence. The quiet isn't just the absence of physical hunger. It's an opening.
Mhm.
It can be unsettling, maybe, because you might not have experienced that kind of silence before around food.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose is to use that quiet space to just observe, to see the emotions that surface when you can't automatically reach for food for comfort. It's about learning to just listen to what's going on inside.
And then point 2 is rewire the rituals.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because for every pound lost, there's likely a habit or a ritual tied to food that needs replacing, not just, removing.
Right.
Our food rituals are deeply ingrained, often neurological. So when semaglutide quiets that biological drive to eat constantly, those habits like, say, reaching for something when you're stressed or bored, often remain.
So you might not actually be hungry, but you still have the impulse, the old pattern.
Precisely. Yeah. The framework stresses substituting those old habits with new, healthier rituals.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a walk, maybe journaling, maybe connecting with a friend. The medication makes it easier to see the rituals that need rebuilding, but you still have to do the work of building the new ones.
Okay. Point 3 is anchor identity before the weight drops. This feels almost counterintuitive when the focus is usually so much on the physical transformation first.
It does, but it addresses a major potential pitfall. The physical body can change much, much faster than a person's sense of self or their identity. So if your external appearance shifts dramatically while your internal identity hasn't caught up, the brain can actually trigger self-sabotage to bring things back into what feels like alignment.
Wow, okay.
So this point is about actively asking, who am I becoming? And consciously building that new identity anchor early in the process.
Point 4, pace the process. This seems like a gentle, almost necessary reminder in a world that pushes for, instant results all the time.
And a really necessary one, yeah. The sources argue that while fast results are exciting, they often aren't lasting results. Pacing is described here as a form of protection.
Protection.
Yeah, it gives your body time to adapt physically, and just as critically, it gives your emotional and psychological self time to integrate the changes, to catch up.
And the sources connect this directly to why some people might stall out or plateau.
Yes, exactly. Very rapid weight loss can trigger metabolic adaptations, slowing things down.
Right.
So pacing isn't about being slow just for the sake of it. It's about positioning yourself to actually finish the journey sustainably, not just win the initial sprint.
Right.
Rapid physical change without that corresponding emotional and behavioral integration. Well, it can lead to collapse later on.
Moving to point 5, plan the off-ramp from day 1. Thinking about stopping the medication before you've even really gotten going, that sounds odd at first.
It does, but it's presented as critical because, according to these sources, the real work often truly begins after you stop using the medication regularly.
Okay, why is that?
Well, the idea is that relapse isn't typically because the drug's effects instantly vanish and hunger just roars back uncontrollably. It's more often because the unaddressed behavioral and emotional patterns resurface when that biological pause button is released.
Ah, okay. So if you don't have a strategy for navigating triggers and maintaining the changes without the medication's direct effect, the old biology and habits can just creep back in.
Exactly. You need a concrete plan for life after semaglutide, essentially, to maintain the progress you've made, built from day one.
Point 6, build the scaffolding.
Right. And support here isn't seen as just a nice-to-have, something optional. It's described as essential neurobiological scaffolding.
Neurobiological.
Yeah. The protocol deliberately builds in emotional support, community, structure, even a shared language. The sources make this really key distinction. AI can provide information, sure, but humans provide meaning. And the argument is you need both kinds of support to truly build and sustain lasting change.
And finally, point 7, rewrite the narrative.
This one's powerful. Weight loss certainly involves biology, we know that. But staying there, maintaining it, is fundamentally about your narrative.
The stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. It's about consciously rewriting the stories you carry, about past failures, about food itself, about your own inherent worth. The idea is that no medication can ultimately counteract a deeply held internal story that says, I don't deserve this lasting change. So this step is about actively changing that internal dialogue.
That whole framework, all 7 points, it really shines a light on a lot of the common fears and questions people have when they start thinking about this journey, doesn't it?
It really does try to address them head on. Take the fear of failure, for instance, a big one.
Huge.
The sources address past failures directly, saying, look, if you've tried and failed before, that's actually valuable data. You've tested what doesn't work for you. Now you have the chance to build what does work, using tools that actually align with your biology, rather than just blaming yourself or, shaming your past behavior. Failure is only failure if you don't learn from it. And this process is designed for learning, often learning together with others.
Or that feeling some people describe, like they've somehow lost control because they don't feel those old familiar hunger cues anymore. It can be disorienting.
Yeah, and the framework suggests that feeling isn't really about losing control, but perhaps about losing connection.
Connection? How so?
Connection to more subtle hunger cues, maybe. Connection to a sense of purpose beyond just food. Connection to yourself, really. And the process is designed to help you rebuild those connections consciously.
What about the idea that using medication like this is somehow cheating? That's a common sentiment you hear.
It comes up a lot. The perspective offered in the sources is quite direct on this. If your individual biochemistry is inherently making weight management an uphill battle, a constant struggle, then using science and medicine to address that isn't cheating. It's simply adapting.
Right.
They argue the real cheat, maybe, was pretending that willpower alone could ever be enough to overcome significant biological challenges for everyone.
That's a powerful reframe. And there's an almost surprising element mentioned in the FAQs, what the developer himself found most surprising about using semaglutide.
Yes, he mentioned it was the quiet, just the
Oh.
silence, not realizing just how dominant and, well, loud the constant thought of food, cravings, and eating actually was in his life until semaglutide quieted it down.
Wow.
That silence was initially unsettling, he said, which makes sense, but also strangely beautiful.
It really underscores that this isn't just a physical transformation we're talking about, but potentially a really profound mental and emotional one, too.
Absolutely. This whole protocol, this framework, it represents a fundamental shift in approach.
Yeah.
It really moves the focus from purely managing biology to actively building identity. From viewing medication as the fix to seeing it as a powerful tool to unlock meaning and enable change. From feelings of shame about past attempts to building practical structure for the future. And from simply experiencing that silence to developing a conscious strategy within it.
And that, the sources argue, is the key to transformation that actually holds, that lasts over time.
It's really about building a sustainable new way of living, not just achieving a temporary state and hoping for the best.
This deep dive into these sources, it gives us such a powerful and really distinct perspective on using semaglutide for weight loss. It truly reframes it, doesn't it?
Look.
From a simple medical intervention into this guided process of self-discovery and conscious rebuilding.
It completely flips the script, yeah. From thinking of it as a passive fix to seeing it as an active, human-centered journey of growth, where the medication serves as the enabler, the catalyst we mentioned, not the endpoint itself.
So as you reflect on all this, maybe consider the power of these concepts for yourself. Well, what if the most significant part of this entire journey isn't actually measured on a scale at all? But maybe it's found in that unsettling yet potentially beautiful silence you might discover, and what you actively choose to build within that quiet space.
Or perhaps, consider this, that true and lasting change might have less to do with summoning endless discipline day after day and far more to do with the quiet, dedicated work of simply becoming a different person, anchoring a new sense of identity well before your body even fully catches up to the transformation.